What's the link between software and your health? Hi, my name is Oded, and in this podcast I'll talk about software development in the field of medical device, pharmaceutical, and healthcare with industry-leading experts. Today we have Jeff Gable to give us advice on software design documentation and implementation. Hi Jeff, thank you very much for participating in the podcast. Maybe we can start by you telling us a bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Jeff Gable. I'm an embedded software consultant for the medical device industry. And my mission is to pull the medical device industry, specifically software development within the medical device industry, kicking and screaming into the 21st century. By that, I mean, I am trying to get the medical device industry, software developers within the industry to use modern software development techniques and tools, agile, continuous integration, test-driven development. And as part of that, I have two aspects to my consulting business. I help medical device companies with software teams implement those techniques and learn how to develop more quickly and more effectively. And with higher quality. And I also have some bandwidth for custom development projects that I still do myself. So that's me and my business.
Right, so you're staying hands-on. You can't disconnect yourself from the code.
Correct. Yeah, I always want to make sure that I'm practicing what I'm preaching and staying aware of new tools and new techniques, and so I always like to keep a certain portion of my business where I'm actively doing development.
Excellent. Okay, so maybe you can tell us, help us understand what is design control. We hear design input, design outputs. Maybe you can help us make some orders with all those terminologies.
Sure. So yeah, you were mentioning before the podcast that the word design gets thrown around and it kind of means different things in different contexts. So when we talk about design controls, design in that context is referring to the overall design of your medical device, and essentially a way to verify that design meets the intended use and the user needs of whatever healthcare worker or patient is going to be using that device at the end. So when we talk about the design control process, that's kind of the level of design we're talking about, the design of your device overall. And so when, that design control process, has certain phases or levels where you're at the top level, you're looking at requirements. At the low level, you're looking at actual implementation, writing code, designing, electronic boards, that kind of thing. Those are different, stages in the design process, and each one of those stages has inputs and outputs. And those, we're, especially with agile techniques, we're trying not to have those necessarily be a in order sequence, that we're trying to iterate through those steps of the process more quickly, maybe a little bit more in parallel, maybe several times in an iterative fashion. But nonetheless, that's, before you can produce a detailed design, you need to have requirements defined. So, and before you can define requirements, you need to have user needs and intended use. And so that's kind of the design inputs versus outputs. The other way that the word design is used in the software context is a detailed design. So once you get software requirements, then you need to do a software detailed design, and then you'll actually write code that implements that design. So that's much more of a lower level context in the software development process, where you're defining what modules you have, what interfaces you have between different parts of the code, between the code and the hardware. That's the kind of, when you say detailed design, that's the kind of design we're talking about.
Do you mean that, let's say that the SRS, the requirement?
Yes.
That for us to do a software detailed design, the SRS, we needed the SRS as the design input, and the design output is the detailed design document. Is that fair statement?
Yes.
And then that design output, that detailed software design, is itself the design input for the implementation stage. Is that a fair point?
Correct.
And we always hear about the design review. You know, as programmers, you want to show your colleagues a diagram of whatever you are planning, the algorithm. Is that what they mean when they say that we have to do a design review, that it has to be with an independent reviewer?
Sure. Yes. So certainly, you know, before you write code, you should design how you think that code is going to work. And part of the, you know, what I preach in terms of agile techniques is not necessarily doing that in a linear fashion, that you do it both incrementally and iteratively and get as much feedback early on as possible. But a design review, I would make that separate from a code review. You definitely want people looking at the overall architecture of your software, not at the implementation of individual functions, but like I said earlier, the interfaces, kind of the high level modules, especially if you have code on different processors, how those are interacting, and just making sure that conceptually this architecture is going to fulfill the requirements and not present undue risks. So that's what's you know, when we're talking about a design review, we're not really looking at lines of code. We're looking at state machines. We're looking at class diagrams. We're looking, you know, go to a whiteboard, as it were, and map out your software, and that's what you're reviewing. In terms of the independence of the reviewer, to me, everything is based on risk. So when you're deciding who should participate in a design review, you choose the personnel that are most likely to identify issues and increase the quality of your software and reduce the risk that you're going to introduce a bug or essentially, you know, have some problem that eventually leads to patient harm. So when people try to say, oh, we need an independent reviewer, so we need to grab someone from the QA team, that could be all well and good if that person on the QA team is actually going to be an effective reviewer. If they're just there to check the box of being independent, that's not useful. That doesn't actually increase software quality. That's you trying to satisfy what you think the language of the standard means, and that's again it doesn't actually contribute to software quality. So certainly it should be a different person than the person who came up with the idea. If one person has come up with this architecture, they need to get someone else who can intelligently critique that architecture. And I would say certainly more than one, but if you get too many cooks in the kitchen, that's not useful either. But it should be based on their judgment of who can provide an intelligent critique and find issues at that stage of the design control process.
So let's say we have a requirement, a software requirement, and we want to proceed with it in the sprint. What is the software design specification? Can you describe this? I don't want to say phase, but this process.
So you're asking about essentially the process to come up with the software design specification,
right?
Right. So again, I'm trying to promote agile techniques, and I want to get away from the very linear process of, okay, you take a requirement and you make a design, and then once the design is fully baked out, you write the code. I really like proceeding in a more both incremental and iterative fashion, where you do a little bit of design and a little bit of code, and then a little bit of design and a little bit of code. And some aspects of the process, you're actually going to write the code first. Say if there's some particular interface that's very, you don't understand it yet. You don't understand how to interact with this particular chip. You would actually code first before you design, just to practice working with this thing and see, reduce kind of the development risk or the product risk of incorporating this new component that you've never worked with before. So it's not you take a requirement, you do a design, and now you have a design document that's been fully verified, and only then do you start coding. I think that the code and the detailed design essentially are developed in parallel, mutually reinforcing. But you can't, in the end, a lot of people skip over the detailed design, go straight to coding, and then end up with a code base that is poorly architected. So I am not telling people to go in that direction. You definitely go back and forth between code and the architecture of that code, and you're reviewing both as you're doing it. Does that help?
Yes, that's help. And I just wanted to ask you that small iterative, I don't say proof of concept, and then go and see and reduce the uncertainty. And the only concern I sometimes have from my experience is that you make this POC, this proof of concept, this initial code, and it feels almost finished, yeah, because and then they say, oh no, but you finished the feature, and you want to say no, I just want to see that it works, so do you know what I mean? Yeah.
I absolutely understand. So I like to call that conflating prototyping and production quality implementation. So that little proof of concept, and I don't have magic bullets for people on how to avoid that, but essentially just be very, very explicit. This is a prototype. This is proof of concept, and you can maybe use the words, this is not production quality. Like, you can, when you do that proof of concept implementation, just like shout it from the rooftops. This is an investigation. It's a proof of concept. It is not production quality. And then essentially, once you're done with that and you've shown that you're, the driver you wrote for this component, or whatever it is that you have prototyped, use that as inspiration, but you can't, you have to go back, and then you've essentially jumped straight to the coding phase, which is great in a prototyping standpoint, but then you have to go back to the design part and really do a good design of this driver or this particular module and how it fits in with the rest of the code, and do a review on both places. So I think as long as people insist on having a documented design and having evidence of a good, strong review of that design, that's probably enough to make sure they don't fall into that trap. Because if anyone ever quickly codes up a prototype proof of concept and then that gets accepted as production quality, kind of by definition, they did not do a review of the design of that module. Does that make sense? So I think having the documented design and having the review of that design is enough to keep you from falling into that trap.
Absolutely. And in reality, I mean, if I understand the main point you say, at the end, we are making two products at the same. We are making the code and we are making the design, and we're finalizing them kind of together. So, but we also hear high-level design, low-level design. We describe the software design specification. How are they different? Do we need everything?
I would say it depends on the complexity of the device that you're building. I tend to work because I'm a solo consultant in my development work. I work on projects where it is feasible for one person to, wrap their arms around a development effort. And so I typically work on devices on the lower end of the complexity scale, handheld treatment devices or diagnostic devices, patient monitors, surgical tools, that kind of thing. That the devices that I typically work on, there's just one software design document because it's typically one processor, maybe two. It's not a huge instrument with lots and lots of components. If you're working on an MRI machine or a big surgical robot that has several different PCB boards, each running their own processor, at that point, I think it's probably useful to have a bit of a hierarchy in your design documentation. And I would say the high level is, these are the different boards, these are their areas of responsibility, and this is how they communicate. And then a detailed design would be of within each board, how is the software on that board designed to fulfill that board's responsibilities. So it depends on the complexity of your instrument.
And the standard, the 62304, it requires system architecture. Does it fit in with that high-level design that you describe, or are these two separately, completely different?
I think what I just described was so for a complex system, I guess that high-level design document that I just described is the system architecture, and then detailed design is where you're going into individual modules in individual within the code base for each individual processor. Again, for the type of devices that I want, those documents essentially they're the same thing. It's a reasonable document length and a reasonable task to combine those into a single document, and that's what I typically do.
Right. And about the traceability, what's your advice when it comes to, we have the SRS, let's say we did the code, we did the design, it's documented. Let's say we even wrote some unit tests. How do you see the traceability?
Right. That's a really excellent question. I think a lot of people spin their wheels and spend time on efforts that don't actually increase the quality of their software. So in terms of doing traceability, you absolutely should, you have your requirements document, and those requirements are numbered. And then you have kind of at the same level of hierarchy in your V model development process, you have your system tests at the end. There absolutely should be full traceability between your tests and your requirements in both directions. The tracing it down to elements in the detailed design and then elements in code, yes, the standard says you must quote unquote trace those. Building a trace matrix where you're saying this particular module fulfills these requirements, and up in the SRS, this particular requirement is fulfilled by these modules. I don't think that is a worthwhile activity. Such a matrix is extremely complex. It changes constantly, and you just spend all your time maintaining the matrix when it's not actually, like, no one cares. No, that doesn't actually increase quality. For me, how I do that tracing is during those design reviews. So when you do a review of a design, you have next to you your requirements document, and essentially, in addition to kind of looking at the design at that level, making sure, like, considering different architectures and kind of debating the merits of that, you're also looking back at the requirements document and essentially making sure, does this design, is this going to hit all of these requirements? And you can do kind of a one-way trace where you essentially just maybe have a column in your requirements document or in whatever software you're using to track requirements, and essentially saying, during a design review, you go through and you check off, yes, this design, I'm confident based on these reasons that it will meet this requirement and this one and this one. And so that's, I think, as far as you should take the tracing of detailed design up to requirements. But I feel like that's a useful level of granularity to strive for. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, especially from the side of really making the software better. So once we are coding, right? What do you advise companies? Do you advise them to keep coding standard? There's so many engineering practices like static code analysis. What are your at least minimum expectation or advice for medical device companies when it comes to really the technical side?
Right. I would absolutely recommend a coding standard. In my work, I typically use the one from the BAR group. That's kind of a well-known embedded software coding standard. Static analysis, yes, I would say, especially in the work that I do, where it's embedded C, I find static analysis to be quite useful. I've seen it in maybe in other domains, like if you're doing some complicated user interface, it may be a little more difficult to get static analysis tools to give you, good, valid results without a lot of false positives. I would say, so I'm a big fan of setting up continuous integration and then incorporating, all of these verification activities you're doing to check the quality of your software, automating them and putting them into a continuous integration pipeline. To me, that, I would essentially characterize that as required these days. Is it required by the standard? No, but that's kind of one of the main techniques that I'm really pushing medical device companies to adopt. It takes a little bit of investment up front and really reaps benefits in terms of reducing manual test burden, reducing the possibility that errors can creep through, and just essentially once you make add essentially a certain layer to that pipeline that will do essentially catch some bugs, be a sieve, a filter that will catch a certain number of bugs that would otherwise get through, and you put that into a continuous integration pipeline, it's going to run automatically every time, and you never have to worry about it again. So that's, that isn't a particular tool that increases quality, but it's something where you put all of these tools in place, and the fact that it's run automatically all the time is itself a game changer in terms of increasing quality.
You described before that software requirement and the system requirement and the testing, that kind of end-to-end testing at the end that has to be traceable. Do you think we can get full confidence in the product? Of course, it depends, but really, how much confidence can we get from the unit test?
From the unit tests, I would say, you're never going to eliminate system level testing. I would, in my work, I do test driven development, and so the result of my work is a automated set of unit tests with extremely high code coverage, and so that gives me, that's just an additional filter preventing bugs. And because I practice that, since I started practicing that test-driven development discipline, I find that I come across many fewer bugs in runtime in manual system testing. Just fewer bugs make it to that stage. But it's not zero. There are still bugs that make it through. And then as soon as I find those bugs in system testing, I go back in, essentially, I can almost always add a unit test to check for that particular bug. And then that particular bug is not going to come back up again. So I would say, comprehensive unit testing has a huge benefit in terms of it really does increase confidence that that your software is of high quality. And the nice thing is it's kind of a one-way valve. Like it only makes it better. And only makes it better over time as you add more and more unit tests. The other way that unit tests leads to higher software quality is then it gives you that confidence to do that refactoring. Once you have passing unit tests and they're comprehensive, and this is particular for test-driven development, that gives you the confidence to refactor aggressively, and refactoring aggressively almost always increases software quality. That's the whole point of refactoring. You're like, say, this is awkward. This is not going to be maintainable. It's poorly structured. I want to refactor it. I want to make sure that I don't break anything while I refactor. If you have a comprehensive set of unit tests, then that gives you the confidence to do that aggressive refactoring and know that you're not going to break anything while you do it.
Right. That's the agility of Agile, right?
That's one aspect of it. I think Agile is a much broader concept, but specifically that's the advantage of test-driven development and of comprehensive unit testing.
Would you say that that also that system level testing need to be automated, can be automated, should be automated?
I would certainly like to see it automated more and more. That's more of a business decision in terms of whether it's worth it, because automated system level testing that can take a lot of investment. You might have to build some kind of hardware in the loop simulator. I've spoken with people in the past. In fact, I'm going to talk with him relatively soon. A person named Paul Massey. He runs a software consultancy called Bluefruit out of the UK, and they have gone all in on agile techniques for software development, and they actually have significant automated system level testing. They actually have robotics that will literally touch portions of a touch screen, and then have hardware on the back end that's pulling data out of the instrument and maybe exercising electrical inputs on the instrument to be able to run automated system level testing. A medical device startup, it's not going to make sense to generally invest that much in automating system tests. It's difficult to do, but for companies that either they're design firms that do this a lot, or they're larger medical device companies with a product line that maybe has a bunch of different variations, very high volume. Maybe they're coming out with new versions every so often. I think those kind of companies can really benefit from investing in automating those system tests. The more you can automate, the better.
That's a great note to finish the conversation. Can you tell the listeners how can they follow you? I know you have a great podcast that I personally listen to all the episodes. Just can you tell us a bit about how can we reach you?
Sure. So you can find me online at jeffgable.com. That's JEFFGABLE.com. I write and speak regularly about agile development in medical device software. My podcast is called the Agile Embedded Podcast, and you can find that on any major podcasting platform, Apple, Spotify, Google, that sort of thing. Please, for all your listeners, if you see anything that you have any questions on or want to get in touch, please get in touch. I would love to hear from you, and you can find a contact form on my website to do so.